Welcome to lecture number 11. Today I'm going to talk about art, activism, and the avant-garde in photography. So during World War I, there was mass devastation of the landscape and of the populace of Europe. World War I was not largely documented photographically because of strict censorship of media. It was generally agreed upon by military officials on all sides that the photographs and news stories should be broadly managed, and this was necessary to keep special operations secret and as well as raise the spirits of those at home. Photographers were eventually entirely banned from the Western Front. This is clearly an image taken after the fact of a battle displaying what was left of the natural environment in 1917. It was an incredibly devastating war, causing unprecedented loss of life. The range of 10 to 13 million people died during the years of the war from 1914 to 1919. So I'm going to start by talking about an art movement that was occurring in England at the time. So near the end of the war, there was a new vision being invented within photography that was free from the constraints of art forms that had preceded it. Alvin Langdon Coburn created pretty abstract looking photographs, which he called vortographs, after a short-lived English art movement called Vorticism. And this was influenced by the painter and writer Wyndham Lewis, and it was embraced by the modern poet Ezra Pound. To make these images, Coburn invented a kaleidoscope-like instrument that had 3 mirrors clamped together, which fitted over the lens of a camera and would reflect and fracture the image. So Ezra Pound called this instrument a vortoscope, and the resulting photographs were called vortographs. So he only made about 18 different vortographs, some as the one you see here, and others that are a little more referential, as you see here, which is an image of Ezra Pound. So Vorticism integrated the ideas of futurism, that movement that I talked about in the last lecture that embraced movement and dynamism, and a belief in all things modern and associated with mechanization and machines, and also influenced by Cubism. This is the cover of a short-lived literary magazine of the Vorticist movement in Britain. The cover of the second and last edition of what was called Blast were by Wyndham Lewis and friends, and this edition included an article by Henri Gautier-Breschke written and submitted from the trenches of World War I. And I'm showing you this image because I think it's a really interesting example of how art influenced life during the time. Dazzle or razzle-dazzle was actually a camouflage scheme that was inspired by vorticism, and it was used by the Allies beginning in World War I. The concept was based on the idea that breaking up a ship's silhouette with brightly contrasting geometric designs would make it harder for U-boat captains to determine a ship's course. So this is an artist's rendering of a dazzle ship in dry dock. And here we see an actual photograph of a ship during World War I with the dazzle camouflage. Again, this is inspired by vorticism, the art and photographic movement. So now let's take a look at Russian revolutionary art. So the revolution of 1917 in Russia puts the socialists in power. And this had a direct impact on artists, as many of them directed their focus on social and political concerns, using art as a means to communicate these ideas. Gustav Klutzis uses the new medium of photomontage, which is an art form modeled after the synthetic cubists, including Picasso and Braque, that was literally a cut and paste method of constructing images. In this image, Klutzis is advocating the continued modernization of the Soviet Union, symbolized by electricity as Vladimir Lenin, the Russian Marxist leader, strides forward into the future. Many artists of this period work in the poster format, creating iconic imagery that could be mass-produced and posted widely. L. Lissitzky is an artist who works in many media, including photography, and one of the most politically committed artists of the era. Lissitzky felt that art should not be an expression of self, but rather that the artist's role was linked to industry, modernization, and the reshaping of everyday life. He promoted the use of the word production artist, associating the artist with technology. And photography was an ideal means of communication as it was a product that could be mass produced. So in this image, you see Lissitzky superimposing an image of himself on a piece of graph paper with a compass and lettering indicating the uniting of hand and eye as a symbol of ideal labor. Alexander Rodchenko was a painter and sculptor, and he took to the medium of collage and photo montage enthusiastically, and as well as to the prospect of art, which was revolutionary in nature. He was interested in making art less theoretical and more practical. And he had a great deal of involvement with the new arts organizations that arose within the socialist government. And he sought to unify a variety of design works in textiles, poster, furniture, with the new values of the state. So here he creates an elaborate system of symbols to illustrate a poem by Vladimir Mayakovsky, which was published in a Russian magazine. Rodchenko also had a great interest in photography, a medium he felt freed artists from inherited aesthetic ideas such as perspective and realistic space. He eventually moved into this mode of image making alone. He was a leading proponent of something called factura, Faktura. This is the idea that an artist should discover a medium's distinctive capabilities by experimenting with its inherent qualities. Rodchenko became interested in using very unusual camera angles, and he preferred a confused kind of perspective. So here we are looking at this person from high above. And another example of the confused perspective that we see in this image. Unusual angles and croppings and reflections were also of interest to Rodchenko. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is Dada, the Weimar Republic, and photomontage. But I'm going to start by looking at Christian Schad. He was a German artist, part of the Zurich Dada group. And Dada was something that was influenced by a poet named Jean Arp. Dada arose as an art form that would be unconstrained by traditional methods of composition. The shadowgraph was a photographic image made up of bits of paper, of fabric, of objects that are randomly strewn onto photo paper and exposed to light. Objects were also moved about during exposure, creating a kind of movement. And one tenet of the Dada movement was the notion of chance or accident. So the act of throwing random things onto a piece of paper, for instance. Although earlier forms of cut and paste with photos had appeared in the late 19th century, such as Lady Filmer and the artists that were making combination photographs in England, it appears that Hannah Höch and Raoul Hausmann were some of the earliest Dada artists to use this form. Their concerns were quite different from Russian avant-garde artists. Dada thought of itself as apolitical, though many images seem to contradict this claim. So here's a photo montage by Hannah Höch, Da Dandy. And here's another Hannah Höch image called Cut with a Kitchen Knife, Dada through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch of Germany, 1919. Dada ridiculed contemporary culture and traditional art forms. The movement was formed to prove the bankruptcy of existing style of artistic expression rather than to promote a particular style itself. In a sense, it was a non-style. It was born as a consequence of the collapse during World War I of social and moral values which had developed up until that time. Dada artists produced works which were nihilistic or reflected a very cynical attitude towards social values. And at the same time, they were irrational, absurd, and playful, emotive and intuitive, and often very cryptic. Several artists employed the chance results of accident as a means of production as well. Hoke was interested in the theme of the new woman as she juxtaposed traditional images of women with images of machinery and technology. Her later work mixes images of modernity with non-Western ethnographic figures and images. The jumbled appearance of photomontage is more than formal inventiveness. It was a token of the quick changes and disruptions of modern life that seemed in the period immediately after World War I and the Russian Revolution to promise progressive social change. Haussmann was Hannah Hoke's lover of 7 years, and he was one of the few communists to insist on women's equality in any new society. Purportedly invented by Grosch and Hartfield, photocollage, from the French word for glue, or photomontage, came to represent the quick changes and disruptions of modern life experienced immediately after World War I and the Russian Revolution. The word montage specified a rapid succession of images, as well as assemblage or construction. The term was agreed upon by the Berlin Dadaist group led by Haussmann. John Hartfield created a number of photomontage pieces that were published in various left-wing magazines and publications, and were highly critical of the rising tide of fascism and the ascent to power of Adolf Hitler. This piece, Adolf the Superman, swallows gold and spouts junk, was used clearly as an anti-Hitler protest in the 1932 election. It refers to the financial backing that Hitler received from wealthy industrialists who feared that Germany would vote for a communist government. Hartfield eventually had to flee Germany for England during the Hitler regime, as his political criticism was clearly not welcome. The graphic design style that arose from Dada and photomontage was used in many publications, such as this cover of View magazine in France. Here, the large gun barrel rises above the ranks of Nazi soldiers, referring to Germany's continued investment in long-range guns, such as Big Bertha, which during World War I was capable of hurling shells nearly 10 miles. One can see the influence of photomontage on the design that was utilized in illustrated news publications. Moholy-nagy was another artist to join the likes of Hoke, Haussmann, Grosch, and Hartfield. He also embraced the use of industrial materials and concepts, which was inspired by the Soviet artists. He had similar notions as Rodchenko about photography's ability to change perceptions because of the ease of mass production. He was interested in experimenting with photography's unique ability to convey shadow and light. He said, "Photography is the first means of giving tangible shape to light, though in a transposed and almost abstract form." He proclaimed that visual images were more powerful than ever before, and that the illiteracy of the future will be the ignorance of photography, in his words. In 1923, moholy-nagy was invited to join the faculty of the newly created art school called the Bauhaus, which was started by a man named Walter Gropius. The goal of the school was to integrate the arts with industry. The Bauhaus curriculum included painting, sculpture, architecture, interior design, and furniture, as well as eventually photography. And here's another image by moholy-nagy. Another Bauhaus instructor was a designer and photographer named Herbert Baer. This is the design for the very first cover of the institution's publication. Baer's post-Bauhaus career included the design of an infamous photo montage for a Nazi brochure. Clearly, the photo montage style could be suited to any political persuasion. So here the soldier, the farmer, and the factory worker are shown hovering above the masses. Germaine Krull was a German-born photographer who worked in the photographic mode of moholy-nagy. She celebrated industrialization as the marriage of the human body and machine. This collection of 28 images is advertised as the Dance of the Metal Nudes. The cover shows the Eiffel Tower, which is a monument that became a powerful symbol for artists as a symbol for change as well as innovation. Barbara Morgan, an American artist, experimented with photomontage in this image called Hearst Over the People, which is an image of the great newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst. In America, the painter Charles Sheeler turned to photography, creating a new aesthetic based on industry and mechanization. And in Paris, I'm going to now talk about Dada and Surrealism. The artists in France took on a much broader scope to their social critique and activism. Artist Marcel Duchamp here draws a mustache on the Mona Lisa and then relabels it with a title that sounds lewd in French. The phrase was Elle a chaud au cul, which translates roughly to she has a hot tail, or as Duchamp put it, she has a fire down below. So Duchamp had worked in a number of artistic media, including painting. If you recall the nude descending a staircase, that was a Duchamp piece. Also collage and what became known as the ready-made. So he coined the term ready-made as a simple relabeling and or recontextualizing of a found object. And this is an example of Duchampian ready-made. So Duchamp responded in defense of his alter ego, R. Mutt, Mr. Mutt, with the following argument. Whether Mr. Mutt, with his own hands, made the fountain or not has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under a new title and point of view, and he created new thought for the object. The Parisian Dadaists turned away from the political focus of the Berlin artists and looked toward wider cultural criticism. Dadaists Ernst and Harp were also interested in creating images that were visually and psychologically disorienting. And here's a photo montage by Max Ernst, Chinese Nightingale. Ernst had a great deal of disdain toward German political Dadaists, saying that, quote, German intellectuals can't even shit or piss without ideology, end quote. André Breton, who was a leading figure in the Paris Dada movement, praised the photographic work of Max Ernst and likened it to the practice of automatic writing. This is the process of reading or speaking a random sequence of words to evade the censorship or the influence of the rational mind. Breton said that automatic writing is the true photography of thought. Man Ray, born Emanuel Radnitsky in New York City, was an artist that worked in a variety of media before coming to the medium of photography. Before moving to Paris in the 1920s, he was a colleague of Alfred Stieglitz and the American artists that were shown at his gallery. Man Ray came to the art of the photogram supposedly by accident and quickly named the process after himself, calling the photogram the rayograph. Ray was an admirer of the paintings of Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres and made a series of photographs inspired by Ingres' languorous nudes of the model Kiki in a turban. And here he paints the F-holes of a stringed instrument onto the photographic print and then rephotographs the print. So Man Ray altered what was originally a classical nude and added the title Le Violon d'Ingres, a French idiom that means hobby. The Surrealist movement began in the mid-1920s in Paris, and like other artistic movements, it included literature, poetry, and art. André Breton, the poet and writer, published the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924. This announced the primacy of the irrational, similar to Dada, and a belief in a truth beyond realism. It was inspired by Freud's theory of the unconscious in part, as well as unconscious desires. The Surrealists advocated change, but not on a state level or a political level. Rather, they were interested in the transformation of human perception and human experience. For the Surrealist publication known as Minotaur, Man Ray used ominous shadows to suggest that a woman's upper torso was transforming itself into the head of a bull. Man Ray had many lovers and models in his life who were prominent artists in their own right. One of his muses was Marie Oppenheim, who was a surrealist sculptor. She is known for creating the very famous fur breakfast, which I'll show you in the next slide. Another was Lee Miller, who was a model and actress who had learned photography from Man Ray and worked as a photojournalist during World War II. Man Ray also experimented with film, creating a number of film shorts, including E Makbakya, or what translates into Don't Bother Me in the Basque language. And here's the Marie Oppenheim piece called Fur Breakfast. She was a surrealist, and her sculptures were sometimes only visible as photographs, for instance, because they either decayed or deteriorated or were lost over time. Hans Bellmer is known for making photographs using mannequins and doll parts as props in rather contorted arrangements. Forbidden sexuality and sensuality were common topics for the surrealists, and many male surrealists used the woman's body as a prop or a subject matter in their photographs. But it was a body that was usually trapped, distorted, or even dismembered. Bellmer's contorted and dismembered doll bodies were criticized by later feminists for their obvious negative implications for women. Ubach was a collaborator of Man Ray's, and he used a process called solarization, or more accurately known as the Sabatier effect, in his work. This is a process in which you develop an image part way and then re-expose it to light, which creates a part positive and part negative image. He also developed a process called brûlage, which is a method of burning the film emulsion, causing distortion when printed. The female surrealists, such as Dora Maar and Claude Cahun, used a different approach in their images. Maar created her own disturbing images, here using a close-up of an armadillo. and here with the hand emerging from the conch shell. Claude Cahun was born Lucy Schwab. She was a writer, activist, and an artist who knew Andre Breton, the leader of the Surrealist movement. She did a large body of work, primarily self-portraits that explore female gender identity. Claude Cahun's body of work was only beginning to be known in the early 1990s, and since then, a number of major exhibitions, books, and studies have been undertaken about her life and work. She moved from Paris to the island of Jersey with her stepsister during the German occupation of France. She was later imprisoned for her subversive activities by the Germans. Brassai is primarily known for his images of Paris at night, images which carry no message of social reform or personal redemption. He also explored surrealist themes in his project called Involuntary Sculpture. The idea of random conjunctions of everyday objects was one that the surrealists embraced. Here he photographed a ticket stub and wads of paper, just presumably found on the ground, and highlighting the magic of coincidence. Andrei Kertész, a Hungarian-born photographer, created a series of distortion photographs using curved mirrors and reflections of the female body. Herbert Baer, we talked about a little bit earlier, of the Bauhaus, went on to embrace surrealist themes in his photographs, including this photo montage and this one, which was a self-portrait. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how avant-garde photography inspired film and advertising between the wars, World War I and World War II. So in the 1920s and 30s, this is a very rich time for the new medium of moving pictures. In Russia, the avant-garde embraced film as a means to communicate their ideas. Cinematographer Zhiga Vertov employed unusual camera angles, superimpositions, and rapidly montaged scenes in the film Man with a Movie Camera. He says, quote, I am kino eye. I am in constant motion. I draw near, then away from objects. I crawl under. I climb onto them. I move apace with the muzzle of a galloping horse. I plunge full speed into a crowd. I outstrip running soldiers. I fall on my back. I ascend with an airplane. I plunge and soar. A film and photographic exhibition that was held in Stuttgart, Germany in 1929. This exhibited many American modernist photographers, including Edward Weston and Imogen Cunningham, who I will be talking about in the subsequent lecture. The Surrealists explored film as well. This is a movie poster from the film called Un Chien Andalou by Salvador Dali, the Surrealist painter. So in experimental photography, you also see fashion and advertising being an avenue for these new forms. So a translation of modernist aesthetic to advertisement for the up-to-date consumer. American photographers were sometimes looked down upon by the art elite for their commercial work. Unlike the pictorialists who espoused photography as a high art, they felt that advertising work was a betrayal of artistic talent. The stylish commodity is visible here, a man's collar being advertised, featuring it against a simple checker print, is a very formal photographic exercise by Paul Outerbridge. And moholy-nagy shows up again here. Europeans had a less stigmatized view of advertisement photography. Many of them work for fashion magazines or publishers or private clients. Will Borstadt, a German writer, said, quote, "The public simply believes without reservation that the photographic representation of an object is truer and more real than any artist's graphic representation," end quote. And he felt that advertisers must take advantage of that illusion of truth. Here we see a very modern looking toothpaste advertisement. And here we see a very surreal looking advertisement for Han Oil in Berlin. Soviet artists saw advertising as a seamless connection between art, commerce, and socialist concerns. The Soviets distinguished between capitalist advertising that misled the public and socialist advertising, which they thought of as an educational tool. An advertising film begun by Rodchenko and Mayakovsky, the poet, promoted products such as state-manufactured beer, candy, pacifiers for babies, etc. And a Russian-born photographer here shows us Schiaparelli beachwear in 1930, working in Paris and running in the same circles as Man Ray and Salvador Dali. He absorbs the aesthetics of a number of 20th century art movements, such as Cubism and Surrealism, in his work. He photographed many stars for the day, including Marlene Dietrich and Charlie Chaplin. Horst P. Horst was a student and colleague of the previous photographer Hoyningen-Huene. Surrealist approaches to ad imagery were often used, especially by Horst, using overlapping lines of cubism as well as the defining lines of solarizing and photograms. And here's a fairly outlandish looking advertising campaign. This is a tableau vivant, if you remember the live actors being used to create a scene. This is a series depicting the history of medicine in 1933, and it's called Surgery Through the Ages. The photos were often used to decorate doctors' offices. Apparently, one little-known symptom of the plague was the contortion of bodies into sexually suggestive poses, which is what is being depicted in this particular image. Imagine seeing that in your doctor's office. And that's the end of today's lecture. Thanks for listening.